Chapter 8.
Dear Mr. Consulate, long before the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo of 1847, when northern Mexico became the southwestern United States, Mexicanos have come and gone, sometimes with and sometimes without documentation. For centuries, this migration was unimpeded until the Mexico-US border was set up. Nevertheless, much natural migration continued relatively unhampered until the Great Depression, when La Migra, the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service, began to clamp down. Since then, many Mexican citizens in this country have sought help by writing letters to the Mexican consulate offices throughout the United States. These exiles were honest, hardworking Mexican farm workers with little or no formal schooling who needed help with all kinds of problems. Some time ago, an amigo tejano gave me a photocopied collection of some of these letters written to Mexican consulate offices throughout the United States from the 30s to the early 60s. The unpublished collection is from the Romulo Munguia collection, the Mexican American Archives, and the Latin American collection in Austin, Texas. The following samples from those letters are presented here with all due respect, for many of these are men and women who, to this day, continue to struggle and labor in this country against incredible odds. Some of these letters were written in phonetic Spanish. It is likely that some were written by those who profess to know the art of letter writing. Some are humorous, some are painful. The following are some of the addresses on the envelopes. 1. Mexican Headquarters. 2. Mexican Consulate General, West Houston Street, Alamo, Texas, U.S. 3. Casualty of Mexico. 4. Mr. Consul of Mexico Custom Building. 5. Consulation General of Mexico. 6. Consul General Mexicano. 7. Official Consular Mail Free. 8. Consulado General Bexar County Jail, Mexico. 9. Mexican Passport Office. 10. To the Señor Consulado General de Mexico, who is in Nogales, Arizona. 11. Señor Consul Mexican, Austin, Texas. 12. Memphis, Tennessee. Please deliver to the Consulate General Mexicano in Los Estados Unidos. 13. Mr. Tucson, Arizona. 14. Consul Manager of the Republic of Mexico. The return address for one letter was 4 West, Texas. Another spelled it Foro West. One person addressed his or her letter to the Department of Protection of the Mexican Consulate. The body of the letters includes one man who complained, quote, I don't own a radio or receive the newspaper, so I wasn't aware that all Mexicanos had to leave their huellas vegetales, end quote. Vegetable prints instead of digital prints. One man wanted a guarantee that he would be able to return to Mexico with the Zenith radio he had bought. He signed with confidence, inexorable courtesies, and hopes for an answer in the affirmative. A man named Musquiz wrote, in view of the fact that I now find myself in this hotel Laredo County Jail and that I had vacation time coming and now will have to pass them here, I request you do me the favor of interceding. Please do not have me fall in the hands of immigration. You have me here at your service and disposition. End quote. One mail order herb salesman complained to the Mexican Consul General, quote, I believe you should have defended me since they took my post office box away because I received money for herbs that I sold. But I see that you have slow blood circulating through your veins because you did not get hot enough to defend me. You should understand that all human beings have the right of struggle for life. I sell herbs to make a living. If someone asks me for an herb for the stomach, I send them what I think will help them. And if it doesn't help them, it is not my fault but theirs for having believed me. This is business, pure and legitimate. Si, señor. End quote. He continued, quote, God have us the right God gave us the right to fight in a struggle. Can't you see that our father Adam, when he was about to expire, called to his deathbed his 100 children and told them, my children, I leave you. Make a living from the stupid. And so I struggle through a divine mandate. So why do you let the law take away my office box? Answer me. Let's see. Answer me. Signed, your crushed co-patriot, Ramirez, Tilden, Texas, 1931. End quote. A Senor Morales addressed the Mexican consulate, quote, Dear Sir, Defender of Mexicanos, since there is no more work in Texas for Mexicanos, I have decided to repatriate myself to Mexico. But before hitting the road, I would like you to let me know if I will have to pay taxes for those things which I am returning with. I don't think you should charge me because I can swear before a notary public that all I have with me is secondhand. And here goes the list of what I want to take with me. My wife, Juana Farias, my wife, Juana Farias, my daughter, Mariana, my daughter, Chona, my son, Macedonio, plates, cups, knives, forks, 3 red women's panties, 4 green women's panties, a night bassinet, 1 water syringe, 1 old Chevy pickup truck. On 29th of June 1945, a Señor Peña wrote the Arts and Sciences Department of the Mexican Consulate. Quote, I expose you to a wise secret which I have discovered of how to make the mute talk again. I would place myself before you in an examination with 4 or 5 people who bring their children with that natural condition, fathers, mothers, or tutors, and they will all leave very happy because from that day on they will be able to communicate with others through the medium of their voice. End quote. One succinct letter cried out, Most appreciated sir, the present in which I have the honor of presiding is with the objective of asking for your help to get me out of this prison. Signed, your attentive prisoner. End quote. One poor man in a mental institution wrote to the, quote, Honorable Consul General Mexicano in San Antonio, Texas. Some time ago, I was looking for Pancho Villa and the Revolution, Jesus Cristo in the Insomnia COC, Hospice of Human Infirmities of the Mind, and Guadalupe Gutierrez of the number 8 precinct of the Candelarias Road, county of Bernalillo, city of Albuquerque, New Mexico. I, his brother, Iscariot, and the Insomnia C41 of the Revolution, Maximilian of the same Austria, one Max Gutierrez. End quote. A budding entrepreneur wrote, I am a working man who would like to get into the egg business in Mexico. I talked to a certain man who, before getting arrested for being a little too happy, told me that you have much experience in these matters and that you could help me. I can sell my eggs at a cheap price because I have chickens and they lay big eggs, although they are not very white, but their quality is the same according to my health permit. Answer me soon so that I may know how to transport my eggs, since I don't want them to get old while I sit around here unemployed. There is no market for them here. Honorable, end quote. Honorable Sir, wrote one father, with all due respect, I direct myself to you, pleading to know in the most attentive manner on the matter of the death of my son Rosendo, who contracted work as a bracero, without knowing to this day the cause that originated the death of my son or motive that might have originated the death. End quote. One letter sounds more ancient than its 1954 date. Quote, Most illustrious and unique sir, considering that longevity and perseverance are doted with double virtue, I await your honorable designees who will dignify to alleviate this difficulty, and that you may be the sufficient and valid defender of my brother, who finds himself a prisoner in La Luna, Texas, according to a communication dated the 13th of the present from that institution. And you whose investiture is loved by the wise, celebrated by the great, and from whom I expect a testimonial of thy invictive favor of interpolution, informing me as I beg of you dearly the state that my brother keeps in his attention. And I embrace the hope that thy favor will defend him and set him free, that perhaps due to ignorance he crossed illegally into this precarious situation. Respectfully. End quote. The man signed his name and added his thumbprint. Chapter 8. All the things I learned in school weren't necessarily true. Perhaps the most memorable experiences one has in school are those that come into direct conflict with one's family's beliefs and traditions. Almost everyone goes through these challenging and unforgettable moments. My earliest conflict came in kindergarten when I was given a quiz about nature. Can the sun shine while it is raining at the same time? Of course, I had seen it, so I checked off yes. In El Paso, it happened all the time, and 40 some years later, it still happens. Throughout the Southwest, it is a very natural occurrence for many, though a phenomenon for others. For Sister Margaret Ann, it was a phenomenon because she had never paid attention. According to Sister, I was wrong, so she put a big fat red X by my yes box. I found it impossible to defend my answer because of the ridicule I received and the anger I felt. In El Paso, I can be wincing at the sun and getting wet at the same time. I can drive in and out of flash floods as easy as going from one block to the next. 4 years later, Sister Mary Justin, my fourth grade teacher, told us that God could not do everything. Quote, He can only do what is possible, says Sister Justine. For instance, God cannot make a circle a square, or vice versa, or make 1 plus 1 equal 1. End quote. Well, I didn't believe that for one instant. God could do everything and anything that was good. To change a circle into a square or vice versa was totally plausible. It was a challenge, and I eventually solved the impossible divine task so that even a human could change a circle to a square. By making the square out of a piece of string, I could easily transform it into a circle or could make a squared circle or a circled square. Since then, I have also learned that 1 plus 1 is not necessarily 2, and that God is she and also goes by the name Quetzalcoatl. Quetzalcoatl. Then there was Mrs. Roth, our music teacher, who expected all of the sixth grade class to open their mouths wide to sing and enunciate each syllable to the fullest. The majority of the class was Mexican American, so she decided to tell us that the lines on old Mexican faces were due to the fact that these people didn't open their mouths and enunciate properly when they talked. As sixth graders, we weren't ready to hear about age lines on our faces, never mind the fact that we knew those lines were due to old age or a merciless desert sun that engraves character into a face. Since my school days, many beliefs have gone down the tube. I can still remember books with black and white photos or color illustrations of what used to be considered a healthy diet: eggs, whole milk, cheese, and meat. Today, we get a whole different message: Fat City with a capital C for cholesterol. My Roman Catholic religion has also gone through tremendous reformations. Back then, if anything was questioned, it was tantamount to sacrilege. Faith, hope, and charity were the magic words. In retrospect, some beliefs were outrageously funny, if not strange. Whatever happened to ejaculations? Spiritual ejaculations were short, profound, prayerful utterings. Each time one was recited, the person got so many days of indulgence. Another one of those funny words. A favorite was 360 days off from purgatory each time someone uttered a spiritual ejaculation. I ejaculated so many times that I must have at least 20 years credit towards time off from purgatory. Unfortunately, Pope John Paul closed down purgatory when he came to power. Was it closed down because the same overcrowding problem we have in our jails and penitentiaries here on earth? Was it a budget problem? Was everybody in purgatory pardoned and sent up to heaven? Or some sent to the eternal fires of hell? What kind of credit can I get for my ejaculations now? These questions remain unanswered. Limbo was also closed down. All those unbaptized babies didn't qualify for heaven, so they were put in limbo. Like these babies, Chicanos have always been in limbo, neither here nor there. Latin Mass was dropped, along with saints such as St. Patrick and St. Christopher. I graduated from St. Patrick's grade school and devoutly attended hundreds of masses at St. Patrick's Church. Now, St. Pat's is nothing but a myth, and St. Christopher was dropped from thousands of automobile dashboards and keychains. Yet, St. Christopher continues as the patron saint of the undocumented and the coyotes who helped them cross the Rio Grande. Somebody must have thought him up from Christopher Columbus, the first wetback to survive crossing a deep divide and wet the dry American soil. Eating meat on Fridays was a God fearing sin. Comedian George Carlin had a whole number about that, as he wondered whatever happened to those people doing time on a meat wrap. But I didn't have to sin to eat meat on Fridays. On this day, I would cross the international border into Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, where it was not a sin, and I could gorge on all the meat tacos I wanted without fear of the eternal fires of hell. There were even times on the US side when we had a countdown to midnight, Friday, to dig into a meat sandwich, a taco, or a hamburger already in our grubby hands. Pagan babies were also popular in my Catholic school days. Any kid could adopt one, name it, and give money for it through the missions. These were third world babies that were supposed to be starving for God and bread. Their brown skin and beautiful big brown eyes were supposed to say it all. Certain movies were forbidden to Catholics by the Catholic League of Decency under penalty of automatic excommunication. Blue Moon was one of the first movies to be considered immoral and depraved. Does anyone remember that movie? That must have been the first shovelful of dirt to reach the depths of depravity with Deep Throat, a real choker. In those days, to be gay was to be happy and joyous. Masturbation could cause blindness, and family planning was sinful. We learned a lot back then. Some of what we learned were fallacies, some were not, and some only reflected different morals and values. But we survived and can now look back and laugh. But no learning experience was more painful or damaging than the silence imposed on our Mexican culture, history, and beautiful Spanish language. To speak was not to speak Spanish was not only illegal but also a sin. Quote, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I spoke Spanish in class and during recess. Mea culpa, mea maxima culpa." I gently rapped my closed fist on my chest. I knew I would sin again, but that was all right because there was always confession, now called reconciliation. The silence of our language, culture, and history was broken at home by our mother, a former school teacher in Mexico. She taught her 6 children to know, love, and respect our language, our customs, and our history. And this is one reason why I write, to express those beliefs and to teach what was once a silent sin. These words etched in black ink are made not from individual letters, but scars that perforate the paper like open wounds to the soul of a young Chicano who sought the truth in his own reflection. Blessed be the teachings of many cultures in the classrooms. Blessed be the truth in her many fashions and forms. Blessed be God in her glory and wisdom. Chapter 9. La Cuetlaxochitl. The popular Christmas flower known as the poinsettia in this country was first called a Cuetlaxochitl by the Aztecs. Cuetlaxochitl. It represented purity, and its name signified flowers that withers, mortal flower that perishes like all that is pure. The Cuetlaxochitl was cultivated as an exotic gift from nature and admired but never touched. Its bright red color had been given by some god as a reminder of the periodic sacrificial offerings in accordance with the creation of the fifth sun. The intense red color represented chachilmatl, the precious liquid, the blood of the sacrifices offered to the gods. Beautiful botanical gardens existed throughout the Aztec Empire in pre Hispanic times. Flowers and herbal plants were cultivated for their beauty and medicinal purposes. From October to May, the Cuetlaxochitl was admired and observed as it flowered like birds of flame. Circa 1440 to 1446, the great Aztec leader Tlacaelel and his half-brother Moctezuma y Huicamina visited the most beautiful of these gardens in Oaxatepec, in what is now the Mexican state of Morelos, and revitalized the Cuetlaxochitl there as reminders of blood sacrifices. One legend explains their origin from 16th century Mexico. Franciscan friars evangelizing the area of Tasco celebrated one Christmas with a lavishly decorated nativity scene. After the rosary and a litany were prayed, a piñata was broken, gifts exchanged, and mass began with when a miracle occurred that frightened off many of the faithful. The flowers turned red. After that night, the flower was named Flor de Nochebuena, flower of the blessed night. Many other legends sprang forth, including one about a young child who had nothing to offer the baby Jesus but a handful of weeds. When she presented them at the nativity scene, the weeds turned into beautiful red flowers. During the following centuries, the Flor de Nochebuena, or Cuetlaxochitl, became a symbol of Christmas and Mexico's evangelization. In earlier times, the flowers bloom in October, signaled the coming of Christmas. The flowers spread throughout the Mexican states. In Chiapas, it's known as cijoyo. In Durango as Catalina. In Guerrero, Michoacán, Veracruz, and Hidalgo, it is known as Flor de Pascua. And in Oaxaca as Flor de Santa Catarina. Chile and Peru call it the crown of the Andes. And in Argentina, it became the federal star because it served as a symbol for the Republicans in their liberation struggle. Today, it is their Flor Nacional. In this country, the flower has another history and another name, but its origin is still Mexican. It all began when Joel Robert Poinsett was appointed as ambassador to Mexico. On Christmas Day, 1825, Ambassador Poinsett visited the Tasco Church of Santa Prisca, where the Franciscans had adorned the nativity scene with strange big flowers that gave it a very elegant and uncommon appearance. Enamored by the flower named Noche Buena, he shipped some to his friends back home in Charleston, South Carolina. This was the origin of naming these flowers poinsettias in this country. Ambassador Joel Poinsett was a multi-talented man. He studied medicine in England and was an amateur architect who built a state road, a bridge with a Gothic arch, and a church in South Carolina. He was a congressman and an unofficial U.S. ambassador to South America and Europe. Early in Poinsett's career, prior to his Mexican ambassadorship, President Martin Van Buren, who served between 1836 and 1840, appointed him Secretary of War. Besides being a botanist who traded seeds with friends on a worldwide basis, Poinsett was also an unabashed nationalist, experimenting with war rockets, lobbying for a national powder factory, and without success tried to establish a military draft system. He increased the size of the army by a third, and many of his soldiers helped transport Indians westward. During Poinsett's term as a Secretary of War, more Indians were displaced than at any other time. While ambassador, Poinsett meddled so much in the affairs of Mexico and the rest of Latin America that the term Poinsettismo was coined to describe officious and intrusive conduct. Poinsett was finally declared persona non grata by the exasperated Mexican government when he took sides in a political dispute. With his life in danger, Poinsett was recalled to Washington on Christmas Day, 1829. During the last years of his life, Poinsett continued to cultivate the flower throughout the South as a symbol of Christmas and succeeded in making a small fortune by introducing it to the United States and the rest of the world. It is ironic that the flower that originally symbolized Aztec blood sacrifices also came to symbolize the blood of Christ, Christmas, and the blood sacrifices of a U.S. Secretary of War who drove more Indians from their homes than any other government official. Poinsett helped found the National Institute for the Promotion of Science and Useful Arts, a precursor of the Smithsonian's Institute. According to Dr. Robert Faden, a botanist at the Smithsonian Institute's National Museum of Natural History, the poinsettia belongs to a large and fascinating species of plants, the Euphobiaceae, that might provide a cleaner, renewable substitute for gasoline and other fossil fuels. 500 years after the encounter between Europe and this continent, we should attempt to recapture the history and contributions of the indigenous people. It would be a noble act to give the flower its original name, Cuetlaxochitl, flower that withers, flower that perishes like all that is pure, as a reminder of one wounded Mother Earth. Chapter 10. Return to the Motherland. Ciudad de Mexico. I continue to be struck by the contrast within Mexico and between that country and the United States. Though I was born and raised on the border, these contrasts seem to me more and more severe each year. On the sidewalks of the wide avenidas, on the narrow side streets, and in the metro subway of the biggest city on earth, 500 years after the conquest, I can still distinguish the criollos from the indios and the mestizos. Not many Mexicanos make that distinction anymore. Many white Euro Mexicanos will shrug their shoulders, declare they are 100% Mexican. Unlike the people in this country, Mexicanos do not partition or categorize their ancestry. On the contrary, offense is taken if they are questioned about their background. In Spanish colonial Mexico, criollos, Mexicanos of pure Spanish parentage, were looked down upon by the mainland Spaniards. The experience of the criollos paralleled that of the Chicanos, born in the United States but of Mexican parentage. Chicanos don't necessarily qualify for first-class citizenship or acceptance, but this comparison is short-lived because Chicanos recognize the racial and cultural complexity of their makeup. Chicanos recognize they are Indios, Hispanos, Mexicanos, and United States citizens. Jose Vasconcelos' theory of la raza cósmica has more validity in this country with the Chicano than with the Mexicano. Mexicanos will tell you they are all one, puros Mexicanos, but as in the United States, not all are equal in the eyes of justice, education, and economic opportunity. En Mexico no hay racismo. Too many Mexicanos will tell you and insist it is classism. Es la clase y la pobreza. Yes, you become more class conscious in Mexico, but race also matters. Who drives taxi cabs? Who sells newspapers? Who dresses well? Who is in military uniform? Indeed, who is in military uniform? Every September 16, Mexico's Day of Independence, a military parade marches through the Zócalo in front of the Presidente and down el Paseo de la Reforma. This formidable parade features not only the latest tanks and troop carriers, but also hundreds of young soldados mexicanos, 100% indios, proud and immaculate in their military outfits. Their physiognomy is no different than the troops Moctezuma commanded 500 years ago. Moctezuma's troops in modern-day army uniform. An irony, the conquered and the oppressed becoming the first line of defense. And it is no different in the United States, where the ancestors of slaves and wetbacks make up the backbone of the military. No matter what Hollywood movies say, African Americans and Chicanos have taken the brunt of the war casualties since World War II. The biggest city in the world is choking with its own smog and poor people. And these poor people don't even contribute to the smog. but the fashionably dressed professionals drive or are driven around with an aura of importance. Leftover criollos and mestizos with a few Indian faces sprinkled among the elite. At the metro subway ticket window, an indigenous family of five has a conference. They look at lost as turistas on their first day in the city, but theirs is a different preoccupation as they slowly count pesos among themselves to see if they can afford the fare. My heart goes out to them and I want to give them something, but maybe they do have enough and I don't want to be condescending. But I am Mexican too and I am human. I vacillate and sometimes give, depending on situation and intuition. Mestizos and indios from the provincias and campesinos from the campo continue to flock into the biggest city in the world. The indio has come down from the mountain. Mexico, land that my parents left so long ago. Their memory lingers in Agustin Lara's songs, Farolito, Solamente una vez, Noche de Ronda, and in the familiar sounds of the Spanish language. I overhear familiar conversations. I'm home. I'm not a stranger, though I was not born in Mexico. But I'm no longer Mexicano, I think. I pause with indecision. I don't know. Mexico has grabbed my back. Mexico lindo y querido, my beautiful and beloved Mexico. But so has my good old US of A. On a radio interview, I am asked, pardon the question, but do you write as a Mexicano or what? Eager for the question that I have anticipated for years, I answer, I write as a Mexicano and I write as a gringo. I am a Mexicano and I am a gringo. I say it with pride and conviction, for what else is a Chicano? Each time I return to Mexico, I find the term Chicano more and more acceptable. The word finally begins to sink in as it struggles to survive in the states against the term Hispanic. It shows the speed of change in a country steeped in tradition. For Mexico, Chicano is a better choice than Hispanic. For Mexicanos, it makes more sense than Hispanic, a term too generic and European for a people that are more indigenous in appearance and culture. The late great Mexican artist Rufino Tamayo was asked in an interview by the Chicano art historian Ramon Favela why he did not like the term Chicano. Tamayo refused to answer, though Favela kept asking. Finally, Tamayo cringed and exploded, because I just don't like it. For many Mexicanos, the word Chicano is like the screech of chalk on the blackboard. It makes their skin quiver down to their toenails. What's in a word? Asks one Mexico City columnist when writing about the word Chicano. If Chicano was a prerogative term at one time, so was the term Judío, Jewish. During the Spanish Inquisition, Jews were called marranos, pigs. My wife Cecilia and I gave a series of talks in Mexico City on Chicano culture, higher education, and feminism. For several days, we fielded questions from inquisitive and interested Mexicanos. Always they begin with the most basic. What is a Chicano? We answer and they come back. See, but what does it mean? With time, definitions change and answers become longer and more complex. A Chicano is both Hispanic and Indian. The term Hispanic alone negates our Indian heritage. Our ancestors were not only the conquistadores, but also the conquered. It is our vanquished heritage that has always haunted us and been ignored. Chicano is more than a political label, for it has a link to our indigenous past. Its etymology dates to the conquest of the Valle de Mexica. Mexica was pronounced Mexica. The Spaniards had no letter or sound in their alphabet for the Nahuatl sh or hard J, so they put an X in its place. Mexico became Mexico, and Texas became Texas. The first mestizos were born of Spanish soldiers and indigenous maidens. This scorned underclass of half breeds were called Mexicanos, which evolved to Chicanos. Chicanos is nothing more than the abbreviated form of Mexicanos. Until recently, the term Chicano was so abhorred in Mexico that much of the media preferred to use Mexicano Americano. In Labyrinth of Solitude, Octavio Paz, Mexico's noble poet and philosopher, avoided the term Chicano, though it was already a common term. However, he did write of the Pachuco, the Chicano Zoot Suitor of the 40s. Years later, and after the Chicano movement, this essay has turned to haunt him as superficial and erroneous. And another essay on the Mexican character, Paz wrote of the Hispanic thesis, quote, Hispanic thesis which would have us descend from Cortes to the exclusion of La Melinche, quote, the Indian interpreter and mistress to Cortes and mother of two of his children. Paz stated, the Mexican does not want to be either an Indian or Spaniard, nor does he want to be descended from them, and he does not affirm himself as a mixture, but rather as an abstraction. End quote. A Chicano in this country confronts reality and identifies as both, claims his full ancestry, and affirms himself as a mixture, a true mixture. Hispanic is half truth, half lie. At the beginning of this century, Mexicans called any Mexicano who crossed the border and lost his Mexican culture as a Chicano, a traitor. Many of those immigrants were poor, rural mestizos shunned by both countries. We inherited traits from our Indian ancestors. Mexican cuisine is Mesoamerican, not Mediterranean. Mexican music has Moorish and indigenous influences. The colors on a Las Artistas palette are not the muted pastels reflecting the cold, gray eastern skies, but brilliant earth colors under a burning, sunlit desert sky. The drama and passion of our culture is reflected in our desert sunrises and sunsets. Andres Segura, a Mexico City Aztec dance general and teacher of Aztec thought and culture, views the Chicano as the ultimate extension of the Mesoamerican Indian. According to Aztec prophecy, their descendants would return to Aztlan, to the southwest. To be a Chicano in the political sense is to know history and our ancestral investment in blood, sweat, and tears. The 1970 East Los Angeles moratorium, the walkouts, boycotts, and protest marches were not led by Hispanics, but by Chicanos. 20 years ago, while Woodstock partied, Blacks, Indios, and Chicanos battled for civil rights. The generic term Hispanic attempts to unite a whole country of diverse Latinos from Afro-Hispanics to Anglo-Hispanics. As a handle, it has been convenient for the government, the media, and the corporate world. However, mere labels don't make a difference in education, median incomes, and political representation. Numbers are power, but the seams and splits still show. Cuban Americans and Mexican Americans occupy opposite ends of the political spectrum. The melting pot theory has proven a myth for Hispanics. Who is a Chicano? Anyone born of Mexican ancestry in the United States. It includes those whose ancestors go back to the Indo-Hispanic roots of the Southwest. It can also include those born in Mexico or other Latin American countries but raised in the United States who identify with Chicanos. It has been a term of choice for many. Today, some young people shy away from the term Chicano in favor of the more acceptable mainstream Hispanic or Mexican American. During my military service from 1960 to 1964, the term Chicano was popular among many of us Mexican Americans from the Southwest. We socialized and communicated using a combination of English, Spanish, and the Chicano dialect of Calo. We proudly called ourselves Chicanos back then. It was hard for many Mexican parents to accept the word Chicano when the movement came. They were puzzled and pained because they knew how prerogative the term was. They may have even used it prerogatively, and now they had children that called themselves Chicanos. My parents' first acceptance was to nickname our brown 1964 Plymouth Valiant El Chicanito. It was cute, not to be taken seriously. For Mexicanos from Mexico, we were plain and simple pochos, spoiled fruit, the literal translation of the word. We had lost our sabor, our Mexicanidad. Times change and time changes. We are now invited to Mexico as Chicanos, to speak as Chicanos, as poetas, as artistas. While many turn Hispanic, some of us continue as Chicanos because we remember the price. Too much blood has been shed to simply check off Hispanic when we fill out the form. The term is but another way to oppress us and negate our history. Consciously or unconsciously, the term is used to stop the evolution of Chicanos. Another popular question in our Mexico City talks: why is the Mexican revolutionary Emiliano Zapata a Chicano hero? What does he have to do with Chicanos? Pancho Villa would make more sense since he was from the northern state of Chihuahua. Zapata was from the south and came to this country as a hero and important symbol to campesinos, for the United Farm Workers. When they immigrated from Mexico, they brought Emiliano Zapata and the Virgin of Guadalupe, two strong symbols of the United Farm Workers. Some Mexicanos remain puzzled. Quote, but you Chicanos don't understand. Emiliano Zapata and Pancho Villa were common criminals and thieves, they insist. Perhaps, but they championed the cause of the poor and oppressed. Besides being revolutionaries, they were avengers. Chicanos have such heroes of their own, including Joaquin Murrieta, Tiburcio Vasquez, and Gregorio Cortes. In Anglo American folklore and history, they were colorful outlaws from the lawless West. But for Chicanos, they were nothing less than avengers resisting the Yankee invasion. On a Wednesday morning, we met with some 30 Chicanologos at the Autonomous Mexican University of Xochimilco. Professors and investigators in various universities around Mexico City met to present their studies of Chicanos and the Mexican migration north. The majority were the anthropologists studying the migration habits of their countrymen to El Norte and their return. Fascinating projects and findings came to light. Many of these Chicanologists began their study by migrating north as undocumented workers and doing their work in the fields, working alongside their paisanos. There are whole Mexican pueblos which serve as direct but unofficial conduits and labor sources to specific communities in the southwest, such as between Aguililla, Aguililla, Michoacan, and Redwood City, California. Okay. Mexico is now acutely concerned about the flight of youth, talent, and labor force to El Norte. It is no longer just the lower income class, but the middle class that is crossing the border. This is likely to make Mexico more democratic and capitalist, and the United States more sensitive, hopefully. One investigator pointed out that migrant women got a taste of equality while working in the United States, and when they returned to Mexico, took up their secondary role with much frustration. That too is changing in Mexico. In reference to the stereotype of what a Chicano is in Mexico, I reminded them that Chicanos are children of exiles, children of revolutionaries, children of undocumented workers, children abandoned by the mother country, children of parents who sought work, sought bread, children they did not educate. They were hard words, but I softened them with the reminder that we were prodigal children returning. What still separates Chicanos from Mexicanos? The language barrier and resentment. While many Chicanos may be bilingual, many are limited in their Spanish, especially when discussing complex subjects. A Chicano in Mexico can feel very out of place because he may look Indian but talks like a gringo. Educated and professional Chicanos can appear mute and dumb in their mother country if they have not mastered Spanish. I have seen many Anglo Americans have an easier time mastering Spanish language, but with Chicanos, there seems to be a barrier, a phobia that is more psychological than people realize. There is a resentment for past treatment. We have scars, and they appear when we talk our mother tongue. At one question and answer period, we were corrected for our use of Mexicano Americano instead of Mexicano Norteamericano. Cecilia quickly replied that it was exactly that type of correction and trivial criticism that kept us apart and prevented Chicanos from communicating, relating, and learning. The conferences came to a poignant end on a Friday night when my book, Weedy People, was presented in a symposium in Coyoacán. Three Mexican writers who had become good friends on other trips spoke favorably of the book, but also criticized the Spanish translations by a combination of editors. After their comments, the microphone on the table was passed to me. I could not talk. My throat and my eyes were about to betray me. I sat there, stone faced, not uttering a word. Twice I began to speak, and twice my throat failed me. The third time, I swallowed the knot and spoke about my Mexican parents. Had they only lived to see my return to La Capital of the country they loved so much but had to leave. I spoke of my mother's ancestors who go back to José Antonio Torres, El Amo, one of the heroes of the Mexican War of Independence against Spain. Today, Cecilia and I are first generation Mexican Americans, parents of second generation Mexican Americans. Since the death of my parents, our ties with relatives in Mexico have slowly dissipated. But this too is part of the Chicano Revolution, an independence from those feelings of shame, hate, and guilt that we may have experienced because of Mexico. I can still clearly and proudly see my ancestry going back to the Mexican War of Independence. But we are now from this side of the border and part of a new era of awareness and independence. Mexico is closer to the Southwest now than when it was theirs. Mexico never left the Southwest, it just learned English. Chapter 11. Passive Resistance. Tepetlixpa, Mexico. September 1986. We drove from the biggest city in the world to this ancient Aztec pueblo. Nahuatl is still spoken here, and many ancient traditions continue. Tepetlixpa is 2 hours from Mexico City. Beneath the aegis Popocatépetl, a dormant volcano wrapped in a romantic myth about an Aztec warrior returning from battle to find his love, Ixtlacihuatl, a companion volcano, in an eternal sleep. 5 hours earlier, in a Mexico City hotel, I had called Andres Segura, an old friend. I was in Mexico to do research on maize, corn, for a mural. Immediately, he scolded me and insisted I go with him to a velada, an all-night violin de Betlixpa. Quote, you don't consult books and murals to learn about maize. Come listen to the pueblo that knows it and grows it, end quote. At 8:30 that night, a taxi drives me to Andres' home. 4 other members of his Aztec dance troupe arrive, including Emilio, Andres' brother, who sits in a wheelchair because of deformative arthritis. Andres, 55, is a healer and spiritual leader who has been able to alleviate Emilio's pain. Andres is also a general of the Aztec dance. Well known in Mexico, he traveled and lived throughout the Southwest during the late 60s and 70s, teaching Aztec thought and culture. His first language is Nahuatl, but he speaks Spanish, some English, and a smattering of other European languages he has picked up on his travels. In Tepelixpa, we will pray for rain. The milpas, cornfields, are in full bloom and need rain. As we drive to Tepelixpa, Andres and I monopolize the conversation, talking about old mutual friends and the Chicano movement. It's been years since he has been to the States. To illustrate what is happening in the United States, I refer to a mural in Merida, Yucatan. It depicts a battle scene between Mayan Indians and Spanish soldiers. Underneath is a plaque with the words, "They conquered us, but our culture conquered them." That is what's happening in Los Estados Unidos, I tell him. The music, language, architecture, dance, food, and dress is strongly being influenced by Indio Hispanics. Andres does not like my reference to the conquest. We have not been conquered. Quote, we have been invaded, but we have not been conquered. What we have is passive resistance. End quote. Andres is still an Aztec in thought, word, and culture. This is a passive resistance, much of it unconscious, he says. Andres asks about various Chicano friends and the projects they are involved in. Like a concerned godfather, he questions some projects, comments on others, but overall he approves and is satisfied. We arrive in Tepetlixpa too soon and the conversation ends. It is midnight as we drive slowly through the dusty pothole streets that look and feel more like arroyos secos, dry streams. The car stops in front of an old wooden portal door with a naked bulb hanging above it. The portal doors open and we are met by a singing crowd of women, men, children, and elders. They hold religious banners of the Virgen de Guadalupe and of Jesucristo. Andres and his troop join the hymns even while they are still in the car. The chants are in Spanish but accentuated with the beat of Aztec drums and charangas, mandolins made from armadillos. Everyone greets everyone as we enter a dirt floor adobe room, approximately 15 by 30 feet. At the front end of the room is a makeshift altar covering the entire wall, filled with carnations and other white flowers, along with candles, statues of saints, and a crucifix. In front of the altar is a square blue tablecloth with four votive candles on each end and one in the middle, the four directions, and the center. There are benches made from the wooden planks resting on empty Pepsi, Cola, and Coca Cola cases. This is passive resistance. The singing continues long after everyone has centered and taken their seats. The hymn finally comes to an end and formal welcomes are given by the elders. Andres thanks them for having been invited to lead the velada. He then introduces me as a brother from El Norte who is with them in spirit and struggle. I feel at home with them and express my gratitude, but I'm at loss for words to say how much more I feel. The hymns continue in Spanish, but the arrangement and the rhythm is indigenous. Two women begin a floral arrangement in the form of a cross at the foot of the altar. It is gently and slowly created, one flower at a time. When the Spaniards arrived, the Indians related to the European cross as a symbol of their four directions. By 2:30 in the morning, the floral cross is finished and the singing prayers stop. We break and go outside to a star-filled sky. Coffee sweetened with honey is passed out in the small earthen jugs. Then a basket filled with tamales is brought in. The tamales are meatless but spiced with diced jalapenos. They fill us and are delicious. We go back inside. At 4:30 in the morning, I begin to doze off. As I sit, my head drops and my whole body begins to plunge. Startled by my fast approach to the floor, I awaken and sit up. This happens again. Throughout the vigil since we arrived, fireworks have been going off into the night sky. In the morning, I can still hear the whistling rockets, and when we go outside, I see the smoking trails above the trees exploding into the blue sky. At 1 in the afternoon, we eat mole with diced cactus, beans, and tortillas. No forks, spoons, or knives. Andres tells everyone how Mexican restaurants in Los Estados Unidos only serve 2 or 3 tortillas for each person. Everyone laughs as they eat their food with pieces of freshly made tortillas that never stop coming. Afterwards, we prepare for a procession to the church atop a hill. About 50 men, women, and children and elders return home for their ceremonial Aztec garments. Gray clouds begin to loom in the distance. The rockets continue to shoot up with their shrill whistles that end in explosions. The procession is difficult for three of us who carry Emilio's wheelchair up a rocky road to the church's front yard. The Aztec dance troupe enters the church while Mass is being celebrated. Our procession prays for a good morning and leaves. I stay inside where the priest is angry, bitterly complaining about the Aztec dances. Quote, "It is nothing but a pachanga," end quote. He raises his voice. It has nothing to do with religion. He then complains about certain citizens of the Petlixpa who have converted to the Testigos de Jehová. Our procession is oblivious to the priest's insults. They believe in Christ and the Virgin, but see the church as just an insensitive institution and nuisance. And in the background, one hears the staccato of Aztec drums, mandolins, the screams of rockets, and explosions in the sky. Andres leads the ceremonial dances in front of the church. At the same time, I noticed from the top of the hill the Tepetlispa Municipal band marching through the pueblo on the way up to the church. The ceremonial dances last 2 hours, and during the breaks, the municipal brass band plays a number or two. Without communicating, the band and the Aztec dancers take turns. Andres takes a break and sits on a rock wall next to me. I finally ask him about the fireworks. He looks at me, refusing to answer. Then he says, "You have to feel it." I listen intently to the growing number of shrill whistles and explosions. Then I begin to hear the reverberating, reverberating echo of the explosions from the dark clouds. The echoes sound like thunder. The explosions have been transformed into thunder or have made the clouds thunder. A miracle, a mirage of sounds. The clouds are heavy and they begin to thunder, but no rain. We all return, chanting down the hill to the adobe room for closing prayers. The dark clouds cover us, but still there is no rain. At 4:30 in the afternoon, the vigil ends. We thank everyone, pack up the car, and close the trunk as big drops of rain fall and raise tiny swirls of dust from the ground. It never fails, explains Emilio with a smile. Just as we leave, the rain arrives. We leave, and I feel no cultural distance. We are one people separated only by space. Culture and time are not separated. We drive through the deep green milpas. Andres is exhausted and falls asleep. I too fall into a soft slumber. We talk no more. I understand more about maize and passive resistance. Chapter 12. He who deserves two masters disappoints one or both. This question may bother you, began the radio interviewer in Mexico City. But do you write as a Mexicano or... The question trailed off, but he didn't have to finish that one question forever asked of Chicanos by Mexicanos. What exactly are you? The question was not only expected but welcomed, so the answer was quick and enthusiastic. Yo soy Mexicano, I answered, but added in Spanish, and I am a gabacho. Culturally, I have as much of the Mexicano as I do of the gringo. I am as comfortable with the Mexican as I am with the Anglo American culture. Never before had I claimed to be a gabacho or even thought of myself as one, much less proclaimed it in a live radio interview. Yet at that instant, I found it necessary to emphasize and reaffirm my cultural and patriotic allegiance to the United States of America. Not to U.S. policy in Latin America, but to the United States of the people. I am the Southwest. I am tortillas and frijoles, but I am also hamburgers and hot dogs. The Chicano movement was an act of identity and self determination. It was meant to dispel the notion of inferiority of Mexicano Norteamericanos. It was a reaffirmation of our indigenous ancestry as well as our Mexican ancestry. But we never claimed to be gringos. On the contrary, we fought the yoke of the gringo oppressor while aspiring for equal opportunities. We are both. We are the vanquished, the victor, wrote Corky Gonzalez in his epic poem, I Am Joaquin. Poet Jose Montoya said it another way. The days are us. And Bogle's famous line, we have met the enemy and it is us, was all too applicable to the Mexican American. Another friend said, I'm Mexican by nature and American by nurture. We were caught on the razor sharp edge of two vastly different cultures. And in trying to identify with each side while condemned by both sides, we denounced both and identified as a third alternative with a little and a lot from each side. We became Chicanos. Born, raised, and educated on the border, I crossed the Rio Grande daily into La Madre Patria. It was the old world, returning to the past, nostalgic trips into daydreams of sights, sounds, street, and kitchen odors. This is where grandmothers, aunts, uncles, and cousins lived in Mexico. But through the brutal reality of childhood, they opened our eyes to the fact that we were not Mexicanos. We were pochos, bastardized Mexicanos. Opocho, the Spanish dictionary states, is spoiled fruit. If anyone was vilified more than the Chicano, it was the gringo. Then I was a Mexicano to them because they would tell me the sins of the Anglo American character I was picking up, losing my Mexicanness. Years later, while I was stationed in Spain, a few Spaniards would tell me of their bitter dislike of the Anglo Americans. I tell you this because you are not an Americano, you are a Mexicano. You are not like them. You know the difference. My silence was one of humorous bewilderment to be considered más español than Americano. As occasional trips take me back to Mexico, I continue to hear the bickering complaints about the Americanos. Finally, I told one Mexican friend that I was tired of hearing my paisanos gringos insulted. She was speechless as I explained my earlier comment that culturally I had assimilated much of the Anglo American culture. Chicanos have the advantage of maintaining the best human values of both cultures. Some people have always considered Chicanos gringos. Frank Del Olmo, the Los Angeles Times editorial writer, likes to tell about the time in Nicaragua when a campesino asked him if he was a gringo or not. Frank explained at length to the campesino that he was a Chicano. Then the campesino again asked him, well, are you or are you not a gringo? As relations between Mexicanos and Chicanos warm and grow each day, there is a tendency for Mexicanos to confuse what exactly a Chicano is. The word Chicano has caught on in Mexico. According to Rodolfo de la Garza, University of Texas at Austin professor, Mexicans have begun to romanticize Chicano history as they understand it through the movies and literature. De la Garza compares this to the Chicanos' romanticization of Mexico during the Chicano movement. More recently, the Mexican government and press have at times named all Mexicans residing in the United States as Chicanos. The documented and undocumented Mexican population in this country is enormous when it includes Chicanos. 30 million by the 21st century are important, it's critical to Mexico's future. Mexico sees or is blinded by the potential lobby of both the Mexican residents in the United States and the actual United States born citizens of Mexican ancestry, alias Mexican Americans, Chicanos. But the Chicanos now seem to be saying, un momento, not so rápido. Don't take me for granted. I am a United States born citizen. If Mexico thinks we have sold out, consider the other half of the story. In this country, Chicanos are Mexico's biggest defenders. After the recent formation of a Mexican Commission on Human Rights along the border, the commission quickly realized that Chicanos in the United States have long struggled for the rights of Mexican citizens in this country. What Chicanos do not necessarily support is the Mexican government or the ruling PRI party. While we may defend and protect the United States national character in Mexico, we also defend and protect the Mexican national character in the United States. This may seem like a contradiction, but culturally we are tied to our mother country. We are binational, says Luis Valdez. At the same time, what flows in our veins is not necessarily what flows in our brain. We are a bridge with only one political allegiance, the United States. As a Spanish saying goes, he who serves two masters disappoints one of them or both. That narrow border where I grew up has expanded and has been sighted in Alaska. Mexicanos, Chicanos, and their culture live in greater numbers in the interior of the United States. Our bilingual, bicultural, binational experience is a form of schizophrenia, rich and poor, sun and shadow, between realism and surrealism. To live on the border is to live in the center. The center unites and separates the four directions. To live on the border unites and separates two cultures, two worlds, to be at the entrance and the exit, and to be able to accept both. These cultures cross each other not to assimilate one another, but to transculturate.